Hey, greetings. It's Fred in Alaska. Thanks for joining me. First, I'd like to start off by saying rest in peace to Tom. He was a co-host with William Jebning on America's Creek Devil for quite a while. Tom was a really good guy. And it reminds me of what an elder, Thomas, I shared some of his experiences here. What he told me last I talked to him was to love your people. You never know. You never know, because tomorrow isn't promised, man, so love your people. Don't let petty disagreements cause a rift that just doesn't need to be there. It's pointless. But anyway, what I want to share with you today comes from the Chistachina River, which is a tributary to the Copper River. This comes from Brad. He's a telecoms worker, and we'll leave that aspect at that. So what he likes to do on his free time when he's not doing all sorts of other stuff is he likes to take out his little dirt bike. You know, he had a couple different ones. Well, on this occasion, he had like a little YZ 125, just a little rip around, easy on the trails, easy on the gas, and he had a modified gas tank on it. And his plan was to take the winter trail up along the Chistachina River, up past Sinanoa Creek and up to this cabin over there, and there's a little bit of a gravel pad there and stuff. But so this was approximately we're going back about a decade, right? And so on this trip he's having trouble, right? Because the trail was pretty unforgiving at that time. It was early in the year. It was just before June. The trail was not conducive for a motorbike, you know, let alone a four-wheeler. You know, it was in that transition period where the snow is unstable, it's melting. Grant you, he was up at about 2,250 feet. So anyway, he's having a struggle with it, and the following day, a couple of his buddies are supposed to be catching up with him, right? And so he's going to leave early. He wasn't worried about bears. It was a little early in the season, so he was armed. He had a 44 mag on his hip. But he wasn't concerned about bears. He was just trying to get out. And one of the reasons he wanted to is just to explore Alaska. He no longer lives here, but that's because of his work. He bounces from state to state doing all this telecoms work and, you know, all that kind of crap, right? You know, with fiber optics and shit like that. But while he was here, he wanted to see as much of Alaska as possible. So his days off before, he went down Copper River, had some Copper River Reds and all this. And, you know, he was just intrigued with the Copper River Valley. And so he wanted to continue that, and that's why he ended up here. Now, the highway crosses there where he started this little journey. So he just passed the gravel pits and all that kind of stuff, and he comes over to where the bridge crosses the Chistachina. And he pulled off. He found a nice little place to kind of tuck back that wasn't too visible from the road. And he yanks out his bike and starts this journey. Well, I only laugh because I've been on trails too early in the season. I know it can be man. He had no winch, no nothing. The bike ain't overly heavy. He's got a big military backpack on. He's got the pistol on his hip. You know, he's got hip waders on and stuff for the muck and the mud and all that kind of stuff. And his helmet. And he's battling each one of these little potholes he had come across. He said it was just like 2 feet of mud, but there was grass there. He said it was the damnedest thing he ever dealt with, right? Now, he's up at elevation, so the snow is just melting right on through and going on down, right? So it's just, it's horrible conditions for especially a little dirt bike. But he was undaunted. He bottomed out many times, had to pull it out of the muck more times than he said he wanted to count. So it delayed him making progress. And he comes to this ravine that is, he already knows that it's getting darker. Grant you, it's land of the midnight sun, so don't misunderstand what I'm saying. It's getting darker in the sense that we still got nighttime in that time of year. You know, it's not quite full on land of the midnight sun, even though it's staying light out upwards of 10 o'clock at night or longer. His reasoning for stopping there was he was wiped out. He had been wrestling this damn dirt bike more than riding it, you know, going all through these muck holes and stuff. So he was spent. Brad said that when he decided he was just going to camp, and he was just going to do a little spike camp, nothing, just a little tarp between two trees to lay under, a little fire, get something to eat and start off, fresh, bright and early. He's sitting and he's looking down into this small ravine where the trail crosses and stuff. And he already knew he was going to have to wrestle this bike up the other side. And so as he's sitting there recounting his journey so far, he said he's basically contemplating in the morning, instead of continuing on, just heading back and wrestling on back and meeting his buddies and trying to decide on a different place. It was a lot of work, right? Now, at this point there's no leaves on the trees. It's all open undergrowth and stuff. Its visibility's pretty good, outside of the black spruce and stuff like that. Now he's looking down into this ravine as it's slowly getting darker, and he's just feeling himself. He kind of nods off a couple times, and he's woken up to a splashy sound. I was like, what the hell is that? So he's looking around, and it's just dark enough he can't see down in the ravine anymore, but the sky is still pretty light. And so he rummages around. He wants to make sure that it wasn't an early spring bear down below him that he's potentially just sleeping on, so to speak, because he didn't want to get eaten. So he rummages around, finds a headlamp. So he puts a headlamp on, rummages around some more, and he said he got his good flashlight. It was about 800 lumens or something like that. And he was standing up at the edge, and he hits the big beam, the 800 lumen beam, down into this little ravine. And he's looking, and with the way some of the vegetation was along there, there wasn't no leaves, but it was just so dense it was hard to see through. But he saw movement, and he was like, oh great, it is a bear. So he killed the light because he didn't want to attract attention. So he sat there listening, trying to anticipate, is it moving up towards me, is it not? Which is a daunting thing. You got to understand, he's sitting there listening, hoping this bear doesn't come up the hill after him, and so he's really unsettled. He doesn't, he drew his gun. He wasn't wanting to have that kind of confrontation. He didn't want to have to call the authorities and deal with all this stuff, so he was really hoping this bear would just meander on down the ravine and continue on down to the river. He said as he was sitting there listening to the splashing and the noises, he started what he called, it sounded like a little monkey or something, because he was hearing these little whoop, 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 little sounds, little vocalizations that were really, it reminded him of the monkey house that he had visited. I think he said it was at Woodland Park Zoo or something like that down in Seattle. Anyway, so, he was intrigued by that, so he stood up and hit the light again, the 800 lumens, and he said down in the ravine, he saw what he thought was a little monkey boy. He said it was hair covered, but not very thick hair, and it looked very young, very small from his perspective looking down on it. It looked surprised, looked up at him, and then bolted back up that ravine. He said it moved fast. He's startled. He's like, how in the hell did a monkey get down there? Because from his perspective, he was just like, what's this chimpanzee or whatever in the hell it is doing down here? And so he's immediately like, whoa, that's really trippy. I'm in the middle of freaking Alaska, and there's a monkey boy. Like, what's going on here? Hairy man, Bigfoot, none of that stuff. He always dismissed it as just whatever. People bored and they just want to talk, right? So he's sitting there, and he gets out the phone he had at the time, and he's trying to look for signal. No signal where he was at and whatnot. And so he's like, I don't feel comfortable sitting here. I want to check this monkey boy out, right? And he's not recognizing the potential dangers in what he's deciding to do. Those are his words. He said, man, Fred, I didn't understand the danger I was putting myself in. I was gonna chase monkey boy. So he goes down, turns on his headlamp instead of the bright light, but he's got his gun and the bright light in his hand, but he's using his headlamp to see, and he's trying to go up this creek, and he's looking for tracks. He wants to see some of the tracks and just maybe, take a pic of a track or something like that, right? But everywhere he's looking, it's just obscured by water, and, he could tell it was disturbed, because there's mud and stuff in it. He said he made it about 75 feet going up this draw. Not very, he said it wasn't very far at all, because a lot of times he was staring down. He heard movement further up the draw, but it was at a distance where he was just thinking, that's that little monkey boy, right? And so he gets to a point to where all of a sudden, he said it was like a wall of discomfort he ran into. He got to a point and was just about to step up onto this next little edge, and he said he was overwhelmed by just this wall of don't do it, right? So he stops and he's trying to recognize why he's so uncomfortable. So he's turns on his big light and he's flashing around off to his flanks, to check out, around him, because he's in a little ravine that has some pretty damn steep sides, right? And he's sitting there going, wow, this is not good. I better just retreat. So he's taking his steps. He's, with the headlamp on, he's looking behind himself to watch his steps, and he's keeping that bright light forward. Well, as he's turning around and looking back and forth, one of the times he looked back forward, he saw a glint of eye shine, then it moved into the brush. So he stops and he's looking back up the draw at where the eye shine was. And as he's doing so, he said that's when the little monkey boy crept out, looked at him again, kind of doing this number with its hand, and then ducked back. And he said it was the most surreal, odd thing to be in remote Alaska and see this, right? And I asked him, well, what it looked like. And he said it looked like a little boy / kind of monkey-ish. He said the teeth stuck out a little bit, kind of bulbous just below the nose. Not like a snout at all, just real big teeth in a mouth, you know what I mean? And he also said that it was a very light tan kind of buckskin color. It didn't look wrinkly. It looked fresh-faced, like bright-faced, young-looking. Hair that went from the nose, kind of not around the mouth, nothing around the mouth, but he said the cheeks were exposed up onto the forehead, and it kind of had the look of almost partial caveman, right? And so he's really enthralled at this point, but he's still got this discomfort. He said he just couldn't let go of. He felt so uncomfortable. So even though he's intrigued, he continues looking back and moving, right? Just getting out of there. He said just as he was about to get to where he came down from above where his camp was, he was standing there because he heard louder noises that wasn't the same as the noises he heard little monkey boy making, right? And again, I'm only saying little monkey boy because that's what Brad said. He just kept saying that little monkey boy, this and that. So just, bear with me. So as he gets to a point, he's looking back up this draw and towards the last place he's seen this little monkey boy. He said as he's doing so, between where he was and where that point was, in the light that was beaming, he heard and saw debris and rocks and dirt and stuff sloughed down into this little draw. So immediately, he turns and points up. He said when he pointed up onto the opposite side of the bank, he said he saw the largest being he's ever seen in his life. He said it was so massive, it was pitch black. When he beamed up, it gave red eye shine back, but his face was so dark, he couldn't make out features other than it was humanoid, right? I understand. So he's literally in shock, staring up. He's got his gun in his hand, but he said in that instant, that gun was non-existent. He was just like, what am I looking at? He said as he was doing that and kind of stuck, like, oh, crap. Like, what am I really seeing? He said all of a sudden the loudest scream came out of nowhere. He said it didn't come from the one he's looking at, because that one just stayed still looking down at him. He said he couldn't pinpoint exactly where, but it enveloped that whole area. It was just loud as shit scream. He said he immediately stumbled back. He fell. He had dropped the pistol and scampered up the hill. Now, when he gets up to the top of the hill, he realizes he dropped his gun when he calmed down. He said the amount of time from when he got to the top of the hill to when he calmed down, he could not say. Couldn't say how long it took. It was, it wasn't a good time for him because he was running around. He didn't know what to do. He was freaked out. He kept hiding behind little trees and behind brush. He was so uncomfortable. He just wanted to run and hide, and there was really nowhere for him to hide. He said after he calmed down, and it dawned on him that his gun is down in the ravine and he might want to have that. He said it was the hardest trip he ever had to make in his life to retrieve it, right? And he didn't know where these things were, because after the scream and he scrambled up the hill and everything, it was quiet, dead quiet. He kept turning off and on his bright light as needed, but his headlamp died. So when he decided, I need that gun, he started down. Now he was turning on the light and then kind of turning it off and sloughing and sliding down this hill. He said it wasn't overly steep, but he felt he needed to be as far away while trying to get closer as possible. Yeah, which, we all have our little quirks when we're under pressure or whatever. He gets down there, he looks around and he sees it. It's stainless, you know what I mean? He picks up the pistol, he opens it and looks and is shaking the water off it basically and making sure there's nothing in the barrel, no mud or any obstruction. And he shuts it, tucks it back in the holster, and then backs up the hill, back up to where he was camping. He said that whole time, however long it took, he has no idea, because he said there was moments he would move quickly and other moments it was so hard to move. He had to force himself to move, but he felt he needed something, that gun, and that was the only thing he had, right? So once he was back up top, Brad said as he was sitting there, he's evaluating, should I hike out, instead of wrestling the bike? I don't want to wrestle this bike if these things are around and they potentially chase me, because that's where his mind went. His mind went to, they may chase me. So what he decides to do is to fire up the bike and just wham, wham, wind it out a few times and let that reverberate through the little ravine and stuff. He figured, I'm going to scare these things off with the noise of the dirt bike, little two-cycle, So he fires it up and he does his thing. He's not paying attention to his fuel consumption. He's just rapping that bitch out, man. Just bah, bah, bah. He was just doing everything he could to, in his own mind, get these things to leave. So he does that for a while, kills it, and he's feeling better, He said no sooner than he put the kickstand down and leaned it to where it wouldn't fall over and was sitting there kind of happy, like, okay, that made noise, everything's gone from around me, right? From down in the ravine below him, another scream. He said that scream sounded the second scream sounded far more angry. He said it had this tone of like a roar and a growl at the same time versus just a high-pitched, reverberating, loud-ass, like woman getting murdered scream like the first one was. He said that really bothered him. He said he was so uncomfortable. He was damn near in the fetal position. His pistol's holstered. He's holding the flashlight. It's not on, and he's basically squirming into the fetal position next to this bike. And, he's scared to death. He's full of indecision. He said he couldn't move forward, backward, left, or right. All he could do was his best to make himself as small as possible. And I get that. I understand that kind of fear. It can be very crippling, and indecision is a bitch, man. So he said he's not sure how long he was tucked like that. He wasn't sure, but it had to have been a while, because at some point he started shivering. It was cold. He's up at 2,250 feet. It's still early spring, late spring. There's still melting snow just above him in elevation, and everything's wet, right? So of course, yeah, he's soaking wet. He's shivering on the ground, and the shivering on the ground motivated him to sit up. He said once he sat up and was reassessing the situation, he said he kept hearing a noise like directly across the ravine from him, of little twigs snapping, dirt shuffling down the side wall, things like this. But it was dark, so he he wanted to look with the big light, but he was scared to, right? He didn't want to evoke some kind of attack or something, you know, and pinpoint his exact location, which of course these things probably already knew right where he was. But anyway, so Brad said as he was sitting there deciding whether or not he was going to turn this light on, he drew his gun again just in case. And he, you know, when he turned on the light, he didn't directly point it across. He was examining the pistol again, making sure it was okay and operational. He rotated the hammer a couple times to turn the cylinder to make sure it was functioning. So holding the gun, he decides, all right, I'll do it now, when he heard some sloughing noises of coming across that little ravine there. And he points the light up. He said when he pointed the light across, he saw the silhouette of the big black one. He said this time when he saw it, he could see the sheen of the light on the hair. He could see the skin under the hair. And it basically, this thing wasn't looking directly at the light. It was kind of looking down. He said it almost seemed like it was like, a nuisance. He said the vibe he picked up felt like this thing was just annoyed by him, but not threatened by him. Kind of like, this light. So this thing is looking down as he's trying to examine it. He said as he's looking at it, he could see around the face is really, really dark gray, like a very ashen, dark gray, almost like wet cement, a little darker. And also, from what he could tell, it was the flat face, very big, wide-set jaw, but he was seeing it partially in profile and partially obscured by distance and the effect of the light. So it was a little warped as far as what he was picking up, but you know, the skin tone and stuff he was pretty confident on. At one point he said it looked over at him and kind of gave a glare, like get that light out of my face kind of look. And so he pointed the light down by its lower extremities, you know, by his feet. He said as he was watching it, it stood up and walked up the hill backwards, looking back down at him. So he's shining at his feet. He noticed it stands up because it's still some light up, you know, above there. And then once it does, he's following it with that light, and it backed up the hill on the opposite side, looking at him. And then once it got up to a certain point, it just turned and walked off to his left. And he said he sat there just listening to this thing move through the brush, and he could tell it had moved way all up onto that ravine, you know, further back up in there. He said he turned off the light for a second and was just so relieved that this thing wasn't actively trying to get him, and it moved away. Even with the annoyance of the light, it was obviously doing some other stuff and not worried about Brad. So it went off. He said he calmed down and he sat there just quiet and a sense of relief over him. Okay, they're not actively going to get me, otherwise they could have, right? So he said as he was sitting there and it started getting lighter, he heard that little splish splash again from Monkey Boy, as he called it. And he was like, I don't want to, but I really want to see this thing one more time. So he decides, okay, I'm going to stand up and I'm going to shine down there and see if I could see this Monkey Boy. He stands up, he beams the light down there, and he doesn't see anything. He doesn't see a damn thing. What he does see, however, is a branch. So out of his view of what he could see behind some of the brush and stuff, this thing had a branch and was splashing the water with the branch, making the noises. And he said it almost seemed, when he looked at it, the first thing he thought was, it's almost like it's luring some kind of interaction, like it's trying to entice me to interact. He said he wasn't going for none of that. He doesn't know what the intent was, or if it was just hiding tracks with a stick. He didn't know. He couldn't see the being doing it, but it was obvious it was being used with intelligence to do something down in this little ravine, right? He said that it was very, very hard to walk away from that. He felt compelled that he wanted to go and engage, you know what I mean? And then Brad said he kind of turned around, fired up the dirt bike again, and was shining the light and realized he had ate up a lot of gas just sitting there revving that thing, right? So he kills it real quick because he wants to save gas. He's felt relief because that big one moved away, and obviously they weren't actively trying to get him. And so he calmed down, waited for it to get a little lighter out, and then fired up and followed his back trail as best he could. He said when he got back over to where he basically started his little journey, he said that he doesn't remember how many times he had to wrestle the bike back through the mud the second time. He said he was lost he was overtired. He didn't get virtually no sleep. You know, he was freezing cold from being wet, wrestling this bike for hours on end on the way in, and then, you know, on the way back out, he lost count. When he got back to where his truck was, and it actually wasn't even his truck. It was a loaner truck. It was basically a company truck, you know, that was assigned to him or whatever. I'll leave that out of it. But anyway, so he gets over there, and he's so exhausted that he lays the bike down and just falls asleep in the bed of the truck. He said the keys were somewhere, but the doors were locked. He wasn't going to dig forever. He was so wiped out, he just curled up in the fetal position in the bed of the truck and fell asleep. He said he was woken up by his buddies. He heard them pulling in, and then they heard him laughing. He heard them laughing like, what the hell is this? You know, they thought Brad had got drunk and maybe wiped out his bike. So initially they laughed until they saw him and saw he was pale and stressed looking and just dirty as hell and all wet. Then they were like, are you okay? They thought he wiped out real bad and maybe he was in need of medical attention. He was like, I'm okay. And he said he broke down crying on the tailgate of this truck because he didn't know how to share what he just dealt with these guys. They asked him what happened. He basically told them a lie and said, I was chased by a brown bear. And he left it at that. The guys were like, oh, geez, man, are you okay? You know, they're checking him out for any claw marks or anything like that. He said, I outran the bear. It left, finally stopped, but it really freaked me out. And that's what he told these coworkers, right? He ended up, you know, going back to work just fine. There was a couple other spots, quasi-remote, up near Fairbanks, where he really had a hard time, you know, with PTSD type stuff, being near the trees. He said he was able to overcome it because he would reassure himself, they didn't attack me. I'm okay. You know, I'm okay, that kind of thing, right? I want to thank Brad for coming forward. With he was real nervous about the nature of his job, so I told him I'd be very generic, or I could leave it out. He said, as long as you're generic about it, that's fine. Again, thank you, Brad, for sharing that. You know how to get a hold of me. And again, you know, love your people. Tomorrow's not promised. Again, rest in peace, Tom. Really great guy. You know, Tom, when I first started this channel, I wanted to incorporate missing people. Not to say, you know, oh, the hairy man snatched this person or that. Just in general, you know, as, hey, these are the people missing right now. And I was trying to get context for that. And he tried to help me. And, you know, we were trying to look into 911 calls and this other stuff. And it turned out, you know, he found out for me that without a FOIA act, and even if it comes to an open case, you're not getting anything but that little bulletin, which doesn't tell much. It really doesn't. It doesn't give no context to the missing. So I kind of left that out of the channel just because it was going to be so many obstacles to overcome to even get the bare minimum of information. So I left it out, you know, and I share what I hear when I can. But rest in peace, Tom. You know, he's going to be missed. He did a really great job with William Jebning over there at America's Creek Devil. Again, love your people, man. You never know. Tomorrow ain't promised. Until the next time. Oh, also, I was on with Jim Myers last night. Gosh, my days bleed together. A lot of background stuff going on. Sasquatch Outpost. On the 10th, coming up on the 10th, I'm going to be having a discussion with Doug Hychek. I should have information before then, and I'll share with you guys before then or whatever. But, you know, you guys know me. I don't promote. I'm not a self-promoter, or I don't. It's anyway. It's whatever. I view this as I'm just the newscaster sharing the local news. But thank you guys for joining me, and we'll catch you on the next one.